Tech. I'm Mike. This is Jeff. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, lots of thanks and gratitude to start with. First of all, to our cameraman, Josh, the entrepreneur, Josh Pesek, back there. Thank you to Ministar, everybody in the room, and everybody who's part of Ministar. It helps this event happen. Mike and I crossed paths at a Ministar event 5 years ago, more or less, 4 to 5 years ago. That's what kind of started it. Also, thank you. Who's an entrepreneur? Raise your hand if you're an entrepreneur right now. Awesome. No, seriously, it's like, we don't give each other ourselves enough credit. And both Mike and I have a lot of respect and admiration for entrepreneurs. It's not easy. It's not common. But we appreciate what you do as entrepreneurs for the community. You are adding value. You are creating wealth. You are taking risks, making sacrifice. And you're doing so against the grain in this state. It's not common for a lot of reasons. Once you declare that you're going to be an entrepreneur, you go out there, there's a lot of forces that work against you. We all know that. So real quick, where we, Mike and Jeff, we started Tech.mn 4 or 5 years ago. Started as a blog in response to a need for information and transparency around what was happening in the entrepreneurial community, what's happening in the technology industry. There was really not a lot of insight into who was doing what. And we identified that as a major pain point in the market and a barrier to growth. So that's what we set out to do, started with Tech.mn.
Tech.mn, we've got a lot of offerings on the site, right? A lot of what we do. Obviously, a big part of that, the biggest part of that is the content. It's the news. It's the information about who's doing what. And that's an important part of any ecosystem, right? Is understanding that there is activity happening. And there is a ton of activity happening here. So that was the primary driver, the primary impetus behind us starting. And of course, there's a lot of things that surround that. There's a lot of things that go into a startup community. So our site has a calendar for events. Every technology event that's happening in Minnesota is on that calendar as soon as we hear about it, as it relates to high tech and startups. Okay? We also have a jobs board as a resource where people can post and find jobs in the software industry here, in the high-tech industry, as well as find and post themselves as freelancers. And we have the largest directory or database of companies and all the players in those companies. So all the people, all the investors, all of the groups, user groups that make up this ecosystem with all of the data surrounding each of those tied back to jobs and events and articles and content. So it's a really great tool that you can use as you're finding more about the tech community here. And of course, one of the most popular features is the subscription. We send out a daily digest or a weekly digest, so it's really easy to keep on top of, keep your finger on the pulse of what's happening in Minnesota Tech.
Context, what is an entrepreneur? Who wants to read that definition? I can't read it from over here. Go ahead.
A person who identifies and organizes a for-profit business venture, sourcing and organizing the required resources while taking both risks and rewards associated with the venture.
So that's a working definition we can use for this conversation and kind of what we go by off Tech.mn. When we use the term entrepreneur, because it can mean different things to different people. So for the sake of this conversation and what we publish and talk about Tech.mn, more or less that's what we're going off of. It's not a fixed, it's not a fixed thing, it's dynamic in nature, but that's the gist of what we mean when we say that. We estimate right now that there are approximately 250 technology entrepreneurs. That's like web, mobile, hardware, could have to do with SaaS, obviously. And then there's a variety of niches in the technology as well. Typically, you might think of that as high technology. But what it's not is it's not med device, it's not life science, it's not bio, it's not pharma, it's not clean, green, renewable energy, it's not the bars or the liquor, the beer industry or whatever. It's the very focused group of entrepreneurs, and we think there's probably about 250 at a point in time in the state of Minnesota. That number fluctuates, it's not an exact science. What is an investor, Patrick?
A person who allocates capital with the expectation of a financial return.
Simple enough, right? Know the difference that there's not all money is created equal. That's one of the things on Tech.mn that we've realized and learned. It's one of the things that I think entrepreneurs are learning as well. There's a difference between smart money versus dumb money versus funny money. In short, we would say that smart money is private money, money that has been earned by an individual who is investing it themselves. It's their own money. It's made different. Dumb money might be money that has been given, might be money that's being given through different vehicles or different mechanisms. It's not coming from the original source. It's not earned money. It's going through maybe different intermediaries that are connected or disconnected, I should say, from the original source of that money. And funny money, anybody want to take a guess on what funny money is?
Bitcoin.
Yeah, right. Funny money is taxpayer money in our eyes. Funny money is public money. Funny money has no sensibility and really does not understand to the degree that smart money or dumb money might, depending on where it's coming from. So we differentiate those sources. And we anticipate, or we believe there's about 100 active Minnesota tech investors that are smart money in the state of Minnesota. Again, it's not an exact science. Some are more public than others, but this is kind of what we use when we say investor, that's what we mean, and different types of money that are available in the marketplace.
So one of the things that we think about a lot, obviously, is the nuances of the culture of a tech community, of a tech startup community. How many of you are familiar with Brad Feld and the Foundry Group down in Boulder, Colorado? How many people have read his book on startup communities? So he has some really great principles. I encourage you to read that book. It's something that we think about often. And I just want to run through a really high level. The Feld philosophy on building great startup communities, because we all as entrepreneurs have a vested interest in that, and that's of course why Jeff and I started Tech.mn, is to be one of the many catalysts needed among all of the great things that you guys are doing to really push forward the startup community here in Minnesota as it relates to technology. Number one, entrepreneurial communities, says Brad Feld, and we agree, are led by entrepreneurs. They're not led by government agencies, they're not led by service providers, they're led by the entrepreneurs themselves. The best entrepreneurial communities need to be led by peers, entrepreneurs. The leaders must have a long-term commitment. Building a community, building anything, takes a long time, it takes a lot of investment. It's not something that can happen overnight. It's about momentum. So Brad Feld says, hey, the leaders must have a long-term commitment. Number three, the startup community must be inclusive of anyone who wants to participate in it. So you don't turn away someone because you don't, they had a couple failures and you don't think that they're a real entrepreneur. You don't turn away someone because they've got a 9 to 5 and want to be an entrepreneur, right? The startup community is inclusive of people who want to be entrepreneurs. And then fourth, the startup community must have continual activities that engage the entire entrepreneurial staff. Right, so events like mini bars is obviously a perfect example of the type of event that brings entrepreneurs together. It brings all the stakeholders in the ecosystem, including the investors, into one spot to have discussions like these.
Where are we at right now? Some quick data points. We're looking at about 1,500 product tech companies in Minnesota at any given point in time, as opposed to like services or client services and consulting companies. Our agencies, things of that nature. There's plenty of that happening as well, but what we focus on mostly is the product-oriented technology companies. About 250 early-stage startup companies in technology here in Minnesota. There's about 150 unique special interest groups. This could be any number of like the Ruby MN group, or think about the Python meetup, or there's a lot of meetups happening. There's a lot of special interest groups. This overlaps with kind of hard engineering technology and also the entrepreneurial or business side of technology. But we've identified about 150 groups. The month of April, there's 100 different tech events on our calendar right now, this month. That's how much is happening in Minnesota. Look back 3, 4, 5 years. I think, who was it this morning told me, Kevin Spring had mentioned, he's like, there was an event every other week or something along those lines. Now, I think yesterday alone, there was 10 events on our calendar. One day for the tech industry. That's a phenomenal amount of activity.
Well, I think it's kind of an avalanche effect. I mean, you guys get this started up, all of a sudden people can go to a central location and say, we're doing this. They might have been occurring before, but now you have a central location that you guys put this on our thing. And it just starts bringing more and more people start going there and they start their own organizations.
That's a good point, Mark, yeah. April, we're seeing 5 large events or conferences this month alone. Did you all know that the Nerdery Overnight Website Challenge is happening simultaneously right now? It's another huge event. And when we say large conferences, we're looking at things that are 300, 400, 500, or of course minibar. The top of that list here, let's say 700 to 1,000 people come through the doors. This is just in April alone, so it's the amount of activity. So do some math on that. Safely say there's 1,000 tech events in Minnesota happening on an annual basis. So is there 1,000 events happening where else in the Midwest? I don't know. Anybody know Chicago's market very well? Is there 1,000 tech events a year? They're doing that about this volume?
Chicago's really been growing in tech in the year.
Cool. Love to hear more about that too. Keep going where we at. So 2010, we recorded 42 companies, raised $60 million in investment capital. This is $25,000 or above. We think everything is valuable. It doesn't have to be VC money to be noted, to be worthy. If you're an entrepreneur and you raise $25,000 in seed capital, that's fantastic. That's an accomplishment, a milestone. We want to hear about that. We want to write about that. We want to get that into the database, and we want to spread the good word on that because every bit counts and it all adds up. And we're seeing this grow over the years. Look at those numbers. This is on the record. There's probably transactions and deals that we don't capture. So if anything, these numbers are higher. Always room for improvement. Go ahead.
What's the average take per company? I mean, I'm just seeing the numbers there. I'm not doing it in my head. Is that going up or down itself?
It's pretty constant. I want to say it's like 250, 300
Okay.
average, but it's one way to look at it. We've been tracking M&A deals in tech for a little while now. These are transactions involving mergers or acquisitions. This is what we've seen over the past couple of years. So far this year at 22, quarter one, times 4, what is that, 80 we're on track to do? See 80 deals this year at this rate. Maybe it's skewed to the first half of the year. Other people might know more about that than we do, but this is what we're seeing right now in terms of liquidity and transactions that are happening involving Minnesota tech companies. And this could be companies from out of state buying Minnesota companies or Minnesota companies in state buying out of state companies. And there's a lot of nuances and variances to that, and we do a monthly and an annual report that breaks this down in more detail for those who are curious to see more about what some of the micro trends are in that aspect. So, before we get a really lively discussion going here, we'll offer up a few anecdotes. This is some things that we see anecdotally from our vantage point. Strength in numbers. As entrepreneurs, it's you against the world. And there's strength in numbers. Know your peer entrepreneurs. Develop a network and relationships with them. The stronger we are as Minnesota entrepreneurs, the stronger our companies will be when they go out there and they're up against challenges internationally.
Going back to the mergers and acquisitions thing, I know in the past few years there have been companies that have been started in Minnesota but then had investors that said, we want you to move out to San Francisco, the Valley, wherever. Are you guys keeping track of those as well?
Those that leave?
Yes.
Yes and no. I mean, they're gone.
Yeah.
Innovation, WTF. This whole notion or concept of innovation has really been diluted to death. It doesn't mean anything anymore. One of the more profound things I've heard recently is don't consider yourself or call yourself innovative or disruptive. Let somebody else call or consider yourself that. When I hear an entrepreneur use verbiage like innovate and we're innovative or disruptive, it kind of just makes me wonder. But innovation, what does that really mean? Define your innovations. If we're out here where we're using words, what's the capacity and the scope of these words? How innovative or disruptive are you? What does that really mean anymore? Because in and of itself, it doesn't mean a whole lot. And I think that we're better than that. I think that we're capable of better articulating what it is that differentiates our companies and what it is that differentiates our offerings out there in the marketplace. Come original. If you're going to do an event or you're going to do something that's designed to be supportive of entrepreneurs, of course, be an entrepreneur per the philosophies of Bradfeld. But come original. Bring something to the table that doesn't exist or that is truly filling a void. Don't just start an event for the sake of it because you want to be a part of the next event that is the same as the other 5 events happening that week. We're seeing some of that duplicative nature. That's fine, that's going to happen, but I would encourage you, if you're going to be participatory, to come original. Think as original as you can. Look at the coast, look at what's working out there. That's one thing we can do is we can see what's happening in these coastal areas and we can bring those things here if we do that strategically. Less mediocre entrepreneurs, more extraordinary entrepreneurs. Frankly, we need to be producing a community of better entrepreneurs. We need to challenge ourselves to be better entrepreneurs. And we need more entrepreneurs as well. So those in the audience who didn't raise their hand, Think about what it is that if you are going to become an entrepreneur or aspiring entrepreneur, how are you going to really be doing something that's going to be different? Are you going to be one of the 10 apps that does the same exact thing, more or less? Or are you going to be truly bringing something that is actually really unique and just mind-blowing? Once in a while we see that. We see those really big visions and we see those crazy ideas that come out. Let's see more of those. I think that would be phenomenal. Entrepreneurs are the leaders. Let's acknowledge that and let's move on and let's understand that leaders aren't anybody but the entrepreneurs themselves. Let's give them the respect and the attention that they deserve. Think about how you can help them. So give first, reciprocate, support your peers, and understand values. Those are some of the anecdotal takeaways that we have. And with that, I think we might do one more or not, but let's talk about opinions that people have. Like ours. So just our opinions, what are yours? What do you think, Dan?
Good question. I like what you're saying about the innovation because that's truly believable. And where is the creativity coming from? Where the idea is coming from? And it's Minnesota by nature, and it's the fact that if you look at all the developed countries in the world, they're all in temperate climates.
Okay.
And Minnesota, as we know from this winter, is the most temperate climate around. Does that make us by nature more risk adverse than when you can just literally sleep on the beach or something?
I like where your head's at.
Yeah. Find the beach.
What else we got? Talk about it, Tom.
Just wondering, I was thinking about the Brad Feld concept that it takes 10 years to build a community. Let's just take that, say that's true.
Yeah.
So do you see a point at which we really began in earnest building the community? And where we at in that trajectory? And what big things, I'm just doing a question, what big things need to take place for us to feel, to know that we're really, taking off?
Those are great questions. I don't have the answers.
Let's start next year.
I mean,
I'm busy this year.
is it your sense that we're like maybe 4 years, 3 years into like really, applying pressure, applying force to this community?
Well, look at the trend that we're seeing just in a very quantitative sense of capital growth. And I think that, like when Mike and I started Tech Data Minute around the very same time that you guys started Coco in St. Paul, it seemed like things were really dire. And I felt, moving back to Minnesota, like things just bottomed out. And hopefully that was the bottom 4 or 5 years ago. So maybe in retrospect, maybe it's somewhere 3 to 5 years into that. I don't know. It's really tough to say.
But I think it's a great question to think about what can we as a community, as entrepreneurs, do to strengthen ourselves, to strengthen our state. I think a lot of times, and it's not just us, but any community anywhere, whether it's in tech or not, or it's in Minnesota or not, looks to outside forces that they can't necessarily control in order to improve their situation. So, we can easily say, well, we wish that as an entrepreneur, I wish that there was more money from investors. I wish there was more investors here. Can I really control that? What can we do as entrepreneurs to encourage and inspire investors to be here, as opposed to just kind of shifting the problem over? So that's a good example of, I'd love to hear from you guys. What are the ideas for bringing the community together and to Jeff's point about strength in numbers?
Prague in here?
Yeah, Prague.
What were you saying earlier that you wanted to talk about, if you still have an interest in sharing that? And by the way, send a tweet or a text if you don't want to raise your hand, because people don't want to put controversial things out there.
Yeah, Jeff and I were having an interesting conversation earlier this morning when we walked in, and I've been involved in the tech community for a while now in here, and a lot of times what we hear is outside factors, right? Hey, not enough investors, like Mike was saying, not enough capital here, and you see the numbers, and clearly that's a lie today. It might have been true 5 or 6 years ago, but I think from an entrepreneurship perspective here in Minnesota, capital, investors, talents, they're attracted to success, right? And what we really need here in Minnesota is companies that are successful, that stay here, that exit here, and then see that capital kind of parse out. And what I was explaining to Jeff earlier this morning was, I've started a couple companies here locally, and two of them primarily, one called Foodsby and one called Book Bottles, With Foodsby, we were kind of at this, 2 years ago, we were trying to raise around capital, angel round capital, around $150,000 to $200,000. And we realized that we weren't going to close it. We were going through different angel networks, through angel groups, and we realized people weren't interested. And we had two decisions to make. One was, we're done, we don't have a cool idea. Or the second one was, we keep our doors open by getting sales, right? Increasing revenue, making sure that we're pushing the business as far as we can go. And that's the decision we ended up making, and we ended up closing around the financing in May of the following year that allowed us to hire and keep going. And I think a lot of times we don't look at ourselves enough internally and say, okay, how do we become more attractive? How do we increase value proposition for investors if that's what we want to do? And I actually thought Jeff made a really interesting question. Is raising capital in your business something that you must have in order for the business to continue to succeed, right? A lot of us think that, yes, capital might influence us to grow quicker and faster, and we'd all love it, but is it gonna, if we don't raise capital, are we gonna shut down our doors tomorrow? And that's a question I think all of us have to ask internally for you to kind of determine what's the right success point.
So it seems about 5 years ago, there was a panel at Minibar, where Dan Grigsby and Jamie Tinglestead, a bunch of people were up on the stage, and they were basically pleading with the community to don't go be independent consultants at GM or General Mills or whatever. Go start your own company. And that was still a weird thing that people weren't doing. And now, 5 years later, 6 years later, there's all these people going, all right, I've decided I want to do this. How do I make it work? And that sea change, I think, shouldn't be underestimated. It's no longer a weird thing or it's almost more expected that you would go and start a small company, that you would go try something. Compared to 10 years ago when no one was doing that, it's pretty amazing to see that change.
Yeah, especially here. Go ahead.
So one thing in that, thinking of all parts of the ecosystem.
Please speak up.
One of the things to think about is the legislative side of things. I know that MHGA is working on a policy side to get involved in trying to help things like the angel investor tax credit. Anything that we can do in terms of that, getting involved with an organization, whatever that organization is, to try to speak loudly and say, hey, we want the access to capital in terms of one of the shortfalls that we have in Minnesota. Getting involved, speaking up, saying that we want to be part of this, we want people to come here and invest in you is another aspect that we can contribute, and I think that's happening with MHGA right now, helping get that angel tax credit funded for future years.
Michael Noble?
Peter and I talked about this a little bit, but to Parag's point on customers, an event or a website around startup dating, your first customer is your hardest customer to get. And your second customer is a little easier, and your third customer is a little easier. Would there be a way for us to support each other by being each other's first customers in a much more better, efficient way? Could there be an event or a website that could help make that happen, where it's a friendly customer and they're going to give you feedback, that kind of thing?
And you're living that right now because you're acquiring local tech customers.
I think your first customers are always going to be people that you know and that are close to you and that can tolerate the mistakes that you're going to make and that kind of stuff. And yeah, our first big customer was Kiplog, and they sat 3 tables over from us at Coco. And since that, the floodgates have started to open. And it really took them believing in us to have other people do it first. So could we create something to Coco kind of does it on its own, but could we do something else?
Well, even to take that a bit further, Michael, is an entrepreneurial, not code of conduct, if there's a better word for this, but an entrepreneurial understanding amongst fellow entrepreneurs that look out for each other. If you see a company that needs these type of customers, play heads up ball on their behalf when you're out talking.
We just put Track.js in, and they're adding a group to their checkout. At some point.
Sounds good.
But that's a great example, or a great opportunity for, that's a good idea for an event, Michael. And that's something that you can make happen. If you see the need for it, as an entrepreneurial community, it's about the entrepreneurs starting and leading the things that they think other entrepreneurs need. So when Don and Kyle, they didn't sit around and say, oh, there'd be a cool, maybe we need a co-working space. Maybe someone should do that. They actually did it.
Mind you, a lot of people were.
A lot of people were talking about it. There was so many people talking about it when Don and Kyle started going into it.
But it goes to Michael Noble's point. I mean, supporting your peers. Who are the entrepreneurs? How can you support each other? I mean, that's so critically important. And one of the values of these people. The other thing I want to mention too is, look at the sponsors. Look at the sponsors in Tech Gentlemen. Look at the sponsors of the events that you go to. Look at the sponsors that are here on the sign right now. These are the companies that are reinvesting. The question you should all be asking yourselves is, how can you help them? How can you do business with and support those that are supporting you so that it feeds the ecosystem, feeds itself? That's something I would definitely suggest is identify those that are putting their resources out there.
Matt, you had something you want to do?
Yeah, can we just take a simple survey of like what kind of companies are in the room? Because it'd be nice to know basis connections. So if there's like software, SaaS, products, hardware, like who's in the room?
Software. Enterprise software. Consumer software. Mobile. Gaming. Health IT, health tech. Edutech. Edutech. Hardware. What are we missing?
Government. Government software.
Government software.
Funny money.
Funny software. Infrastructure.
Yes.
Infrastructure, yeah.
Cool. What else? What else?
Meetup. So
what is it?
Lean, I'm going to pitch my Lean Startup Minnesota meetup group, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things that Michael was talking about was, we are putting together a group for entrepreneurs who are already running their own thing to help support each other. So Michael would love to have you involved in that.
And kudos to you, Dale, for doing that, because that group was started by somebody, right? It just kind of died out, and they weren't relinquishing anything, and no meetups happening, and Dale strong-armed him into starting it back up.
I just started another one. I actually I wasn't successful in any kind of strong arm, but I felt like, anything I can do to help the community. So I'm pretty easy to find, but yeah.
Dale is the man too, by the way. He's been like one of our biggest supporters at Track.js, and he's like put us on a bunch of stuff, and like he talks about us, so he's great. So anything that guy does, for sure. You want to be part of it.
Robin, go ahead.
So I kind of want to go back to the first customer scenario. I'm with Pesek Labs. We're getting ready to launch our Alpha product, and even before we have those first customers, we're looking to alpha test, really. So I think even before we get those first customers going, I think having the community support each other through alpha testing is a great first step.
Yep. It's another idea for an event or a meetup or another part of what Michael's talking about. Yep. Or you could like pass around cards tonight or right now. Yeah.
Well, so along that same line, I think that the issue at hand for a lot of entrepreneurs is...
Speak up, Patrick.
The issue at hand for a lot of entrepreneurs is really resources, what we've been talking about. And so whether it's talent, first customers, someone to alpha beta test products and so forth. And our community always wants a point of capital, because everybody thinks that capital just could solve all this. I could go buy my first customers through advertising, I can now afford to hire people and stuff, but what's been going through my mind a lot, and I don't know where to take this just to kind of plant the seed, but it's like, where and how can we better just have a resource board for entrepreneurs where we know that Approve is looking for its first customers, and I forget your Pesek Labs. They're looking for an alpha tester. I know Dave at Baybeat here in town, he was looking for someone to help him test some software as well. But if we could have more of like a way to just funnel resources, because if we do that, we wouldn't have to rely as much on capital as it's perceived that we need to do, and we could do more what Prague is doing. And when I worked, Chad Halverson and a bunch of these guys that have just kicked ass and gone out and just got customers and just made it happen. You were going to say Prague?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point, but all I was going to say is, I've been involved in a number of different communities, and Minnesota is probably one of the smallest, right? Like, half of you in this room probably know each other already. I'm shocked how little emails I get about, hey, can you test my product for me, right? Hey, I'm releasing this brand new product. Here, it's free. I'm not asking you to sell anything to you. Just test it for me, right? Here's a brand new consumer product. We'll use it first. And I guarantee you, most of us in this room, if we get this email, we're going to do it, right? Unless it adds absolutely no value to our lives, we're probably going to end up downloading it, using it at some level. And if we like it, we're probably going to start sharing it on our social networks. We're probably going to reach out to a few people that we know in our networks and say, hey, you guys should really take a look at this. I'm shocked how little that happens in Minnesota. And that happens across the country, everywhere else. And so, to your point, we just need more of that. We don't need a board necessarily. Everyone's got everyone's email addresses. I mean, throw it to Jack. He'll post something on Tech.com, and then I guarantee you. So, we should. No guarantees.
Don't listen to Prague.
That's Mike.
I'd like to go to this entrepreneurs, independent, going forward, needing a sandbox, needing feedback. Some of you in the room received an invitation this morning to an event that isn't going to look like it fits you. And it's the Minnesota Invention Expo on the 2nd and 3rd of May. That event is an empty vessel. And society is at a technology turning point where you folks with your technology are in the driver's seat going forward. Contact the people working with that event. Take advantage of it because it is designed to be a public interface for inventors. But it's going to look like just a maker thing. But with where society is, it needs to be more than that. And you can leverage that and take it to a completely different level. But you have to do it. The people working with it can't. And they're open to having you do it. So please, in the next 3 weeks,
Thank you, Lois.
take advantage of that.
Question for Matt against the wall. Awfully quiet. You moved to the Twin Cities from Seattle, right?
Yep.
About a year ago, maybe 2 now?
About a year.
A year ago. What's been your experience in assimilating with and integrating into the startup community and then launching your own startup?
Okay, so shameless self-promotion, guys. I'm working on OMD Transit. If you haven't heard of it, it's a real-time transit app. OMDtransit.com. Our mobile apps are coming soon. So I moved here about a year ago. The first guesses are why did I move here? First one's always a girl. That's the right answer. So I came from Seattle, and in Seattle they have like hackathons every weekend, and the startup scene is like very, very, very vibrant and energetic and busy. And in coming here, I joined Coco right away, and that was probably like the biggest thing I could have done to tap in. I mean, coming to Mini Demo and Mini Bar, like these are also, I feel like the community here is better than it is in Seattle. And to your point, the question I had for you about how small you said it felt. Does it feel small because of the number of people or because of how well connected everybody is?
I think as a positive, I think we're so well connected here. And once you're probably felt it moving here, is once you get into a couple networks, you literally have instant access to pretty much everyone that matters in the community.
Yeah.
And I think that's awesome. Where I spend a lot of time in Chicago, that doesn't happen. You have to be part of 8 different groups in order to get that network. I mean, here alone, this event today, I mean, you can probably get to anyone you need to based on who's in this event.
Yep.
So I think that's a positive for our community. We just don't use it. We're shy as a community to reach out and ask for help. We need to do that more often.
Yeah, I agree. And so, I mean, I tapped into the community here really quickly, and it's really easy to do that for anybody who's new here in town as well. I mean, my first inclination is that I feel really good about being here because it's so, because I know everybody. Like, I go to Mini Bar and it's just like a social hour because I know like half the people here. It's at least it feels that way just because there's so many nice people who I bumped into at Mini Star events, at other tech events, at Coco, everywhere else. And the community here is great. I mean, as a percentage of total, I would say it's better than most just in terms of how well connected everybody is. It feels small. I mean, it doesn't feel as big as Chicago or Seattle or San Francisco or New York, but it feels good because I feel like I am part of the community. Also, it's really flat here. That's the other big observation.
Cool. That's part of the 10-year plan.
We'll come back to you.
We're at the Minnesota High Tech Association. have the med tech and vision tech and tech, but they're looking up. You mentioned how startups can support those sponsors right there. And one thing we're trying to do is look at how the Fortune 500s and big companies that have sort of grown up in Minnesota the last 40 years can sort of reacquaint themselves with the startup community. And if we're being honest at MHTA sort of lost track of the startup community over the past 10 to 20 years as companies grew bigger and they sort of operated in that sort of sphere. And so we're trying to figure out a way that we can bridge the two sides, between startup and Fortune 500, the big companies, and we're trying to figure out how to do that. So let us know if you have ideas.
Worthy pursuit. Patrick?
Oh, sorry, do you want to ask a question? Okay,
Yes.
cool. No, I was just going to say that one thing that I would just suggest people do is don't be constrained by what's around you also in terms of capital and talent. I know people will move to Minneapolis, right? I think that's a big part of adding to the community is bringing people in. Like Lead Pages, I think, when we invested, there were like 7-ish people, and I think now they're in the mid-40s. And Clay's got people moving here from Santa Barbara, from Newport, from Nashville, from all these different places, and they will come. And that's a big part of just bringing people in. Hopefully you'll have success. They come here, they're like, wow, this is a badass place to live. I'm going to go start a new company. So I think a lot of times we look nationally or globally for customers, but we don't look that way for talent and for capital, and you can absolutely do that.
Just kind of building off that whole talent thing. I'm also a big fan of like the two-year community college. I'd love to see more student sector entrepreneur things kind of getting started there. I actually brought a friend with me today. She's working on her 2-year in software engineering, and she's never been to an event like this. And this is completely out of the box. But these are great resources because college kids want to learn. And so if you can mentor that and teach that, have them test a product for you, now they're a part of something that's bigger than the education system, which is where you want to take your education. So tapping into those resources, I think, are the key right now.
That's part of engaging the entrepreneurial stack and getting fresh blood into the ecosystem. Definitely. But it's a big cultural thing too, right? I mean, are we taught and trained to take risks or to fit into a pre-existing framework or system as a student?
No, we fit. Entrepreneurship goes great with leaders and mentors. We look at people that are successful or they've done really great things, but then failed miserably somewhere else. And so we need more of that, I think, trickling down to our schools to bring in that fresh blood. We need more local leaders coming into those systems.
Well, those local leaders would be entrepreneurs that are willing to put themselves in those environments. Are you?
I'm down. Totally game. I brought someone with me.
Good. Go ahead. You can raise your hand.
Just feeding off the helping each other out kind of theme. I'm addicted to Hacker News, and I love their show Hacker News posts. And recently, the other day, they had a post called "Help Me Out."
Yeah.
You just list out what you need help with, and also what you can help with. And then they kind of had a forum going. So I guess my idea is kind of, is there right now, or can we have some sort of online forum for a discussion, two-way discussion, and folks to share with each other?
So we can have that. You can start it.
Yeah, or we can start something like that on our site too.
I was going to mention that because somebody brought up a great idea of just connecting and saying, I need some help with alpha testing or whatever, and I right now will be one of the people in this room to volunteer for that. And I know some of you, but I don't know all of you. Is there one place where there's a lot of smart people in this room? Is there one place right now where somebody can start a thread and everybody else in this room can go to that URL and raise their hand and say, I will also get connected somehow and then just volunteer? That's something we can actually walk away with tangible out of this room right now to help each other.
I feel like that should live on Tech Event.
Well, the closest thing we have to that right now is a series called Beta Byte. Has anyone read Beta Byte? Beta Byte's when somebody approaches us and says, hey, this is what I'm working on, and it's kind of in this conceptual phase. There's some substance there. They've got a team together. They've got a prototype, an MVP, an alpha, maybe a beta, some sort of use or whatever. We have templated questions, and one of the questions we ask is, what's one resource you need that can help take this to the next level? So what that does is it helps kind of to a degree filter and vet that, which is just another idea, which we all have a billion of, and something that actually has something pulling together, and then you can identify perhaps a need in that aspect, but see what you guys are describing, maybe there's opportunity for more. Definitely. That's a good point. Go ahead.
So just playing off both of Matt's discussion, I moved here from the Denver, Boulder, and Valley Tech scene 6 months ago. And
wait, from where? Denver, Boulder,
the Denver, Boulder, and the Valley Tech scene. So for me, it was a huge size change. This simple fact that there's thousands and now hundreds instead of hundreds. And for me, the biggest thing here is, it's not a negative, but the very upper Midwest approach is build a product to solve a problem instead of work with the community. And I just wanted to plug into the discussion earlier with the whole using your friends. Our company started 10 years ago, and we used DigitalOcean, Rackspace, SendGrid, and now these large, giant companies, but we were their first customer, not in the term of customer. We were just the guy that said, hey, we'll use your product, let's go. And it would be great to see that more here rather than like, hey, I'm gonna post an award, more of the finding someone and befriending them rather than having to be like, hey, I need customers. That's how community grows.
When you meet a peer entrepreneur, assume that they have needs, whether they're explicit or implicit. They're going to have needs. Ask yourself or ask them directly, what is it that you need? How can I help you? Or that kind of thing. I think that camaraderie amongst entrepreneurs can really go a long way. You really ask them what they need. And even if you're not an entrepreneur, asking a startup, what do you need? Like, what can I possibly do to help you? Maybe I can help you. Maybe I could. Go ahead.
One thing that this might be a phenomenon that you don't see a lot of, but Coco, we see a lot of this. We have a lot of consultants and freelancers come in. What's interesting about them is, a number of them reach the point where they go, God, I build as many hours as I can. I'm getting sick of this hamster wheel I'm on. They start and they learn from the other entrepreneurs around them, and they start thinking about how can I productize my service? How can I create a product? I think it's a really noble, kind of noble, not talking about Michael, but it's a very noble transition somebody can go through. But I think we have so many freelancers and consultants here in this community as creative shops that it's a group that I'm really interested in somehow helping them make that transition and think about how they can rethink, making a living.
Yeah, and you see that actually if you look at some of the really successful tech companies that are getting traction. Code 42, Sport Engine, a lot of those guys started out as a few people doing services and found their way into how do we build a product, how do we productize what we're doing, how do we shift away from this.
Yeah,
so it's a great hotbed.
Yep.
So the natural question in this whole conversation is, does the future require a blueprint? And if so, is it kind of loose like this, like having conversations, or is it something that becomes more formalized over time?
That's a good question. I think it's up to the entrepreneurs to decide what they want to make of it. I mean, there's such a dynamic aspect of entrepreneurship when you multiply that times 200 or 250. There's so much going on in that space. And I think the tendency or natural tendency is to want to make sense of all that and want to structure it and want to control it, frankly. But it's very uncontrollable. When we ask the question, what's next, I don't have an answer. We don't have an answer there. We're going to let the entrepreneurs decide what's next. Our estimation is the trends in capital raising is going to continue to grow. And we're going to see more and more liquidity. We're going to see more investors that are going to be making investments into Minnesota instead of flying over, as we're already seeing. Plus, a lot of the private equity firms and investment banking firms on the higher end are starting to take a look and do more deals here locally as well. I think we're going to see more entrepreneurs that capture liquidity, sticking around, or going back to the game for more, or reinvesting. I would hope that we can see that happening. I think we're going to see a shift from traditional other investment areas into tech. I think we're going to see more capital moving into technology, both in seed stage and venture stage or institutional capital. But that's really up to the community and the entrepreneurs to dictate and decide. We can't make stuff up, as y'all know. We can't make news if there's not things happening that are indicating growth and momentum in the community. What's next for us, I think? Maybe bigger and better questions. That's the challenge that we have amongst ourselves, and welcome your feedback now or in the future. There's a lot of people who do contact us via email or on Twitter or through the contact form. Maybe they send us a broken link, or they send us hate mail or something, who knows. It could be anything, but we appreciate that feedback, because we're part of it.
I was just going to say, if you don't mind, can I pitch a solution to get some feedback on something?
I don't know what that means, but go for it.
Yes. So especially feedback from people that have kind of been in other communities. A little bit I notice what I'm hearing right now is this connectivity problem that we're having, right? How do we connect outside of these really big events and sessions and things like that? And how do we get the word out about our company, whether it's through recruiting, whether it's through customers, whatever? This is something that I've been brewing in my head for a while, and something that I want to launch and kind of soft launch is a hackathon event that happens every other week, that companies actually come and work and have office hours out of a certain location. And we invite the community, everyone that's coming here. You may have an idea, you may not. You might want to get involved in the startup from an equity perspective, a volunteer perspective, from a connections perspective, and we just keep it open-ended to see what happens. And every other week we have a group of companies that say, yeah, we're going to work from this environment in the evening from like 5 to 8. That way people that have jobs, people that have other places, have a place to go that want to get involved in the community from an ongoing basis versus once a year or once every 6 months.
So and you're doing that, it's on the calendar, right?
Yep.
Okay. We have about 30 seconds left. One of the things that we're trying to better understand too from a regional point of view is how does Minnesota stack up against the upper Midwest? We understand that we're not the Valley, we're not New York, we're not Boston. But what about peer markets, even beyond the Midwest, say like Austin, Texas, or the Denver-Boulder corridor, or Seattle? You know, how are we kind of comparing? Now, one of the challenges we have with that is we do a really meticulous job of obtaining and documenting and archiving data, like as objectively as we can around these market indicators. And it's hard to find that in other markets. It's hard to know what is happening in Chicago. Is it just loud noise and sensation, or is it real? And I'm looking for data points from other markets that can help us better understand and discern that.
Just to piggyback on that a little bit, there's an organization that serves the entire region. It's called Greater MSP. I'd really encourage you to follow them on Twitter and actively tweet back at them. They're led by the largest corporations in the metro area. And though they have entrepreneurship as a goal, they don't have as much visibility to the entrepreneurial community as they should. They can do things, spend money, create resources, convene events, but they need more visibility to the entrepreneurial vitality that's here. So their primary concern is to think about how to attract large employers. And so they don't necessarily think about how to revitalize the entrepreneurial community here. So we need to lobby them and push them to create a healthier, stronger ecosystem. So it's Greater MSP. They do have data about competitive markets.
Do they? Yeah. Have them, when they reach out to us and ask us for data, maybe they could give something back in return.
They should hold us back.
Mark?
Yeah, just kind of one comment, you said like
Speak up.
One comment on like comparing with other markets. The Twin Cities has great stuff going on here, and the concern is you don't want to compare yourself to others all the time. And focus on what you do best here. Things here are just great. When you compare it to a lot of other places, the community here is great. The things that are going on here is great. Don't worry about so much what other places are doing. Word will get out to them, and they'll want to come emulate you.
That's a good point, Mark. I wish we had more time. I love the conversation. Thank you for being here. I'm sorry, we're over.